Welcome, guys. We're glad that you're joining us tonight for the student ministry lesson. We just got a couple quick announcements. There's a slideshow going right now on the TV. You can check out a couple things we have going on, but we just want to remind you of some stuff. There's a group me for youth and college students. All right, keep in mind that there's that group me, and you can kind of be involved in some challenges we're putting out. We'll be putting out another challenge tomorrow, and you guys been doing a great job at that stuff. It's been fun. And there's a point system, so the winner at the end, a couple of the winners will receive a Bible with their name written on it, imprinted on it. So keep that in mind. There's a Bible plan in that group, and if you want to be in that Bible plan and you're not in that group, that's okay. Just text me or Brad individually, and we'll get that out to you. Couple other things. Like I said, there's a new challenge tomorrow. We're wrapping one up today. And also, if you're a middle schooler and you're in this listening in tonight, then I want to let you know that we're trying to put something out to you very soon. So just be looking out for that. I'm in the process of getting contact information to be able to send that out. And if you'd like to be a part of whatever we do for the middle schoolers, then just get in contact with me or Brad, and we'll take care of that. I think that's all we have for announcements tonight. So we're going to jump right in to the lesson, and it's going to be a little bit shorter lesson, so you can kind of follow along quickly, and we'll move through. But the first thing that I want to point out is that over the next couple of lessons that you hear from us, we're going to be talking through a couple different stories in the book of Genesis. That's the first book in the Bible, and some very interesting things happened in the first book of the Bible. And I think tonight's story is one you're going to be very familiar with, and it is the story of Noah and the ark. But I want to start out by saying this. I want you to think about, what is your biggest fear? Right? Maybe it's snakes, heights, maybe you're afraid, maybe you're claustrophobic, you're afraid of small spaces, maybe you're afraid of public speaking. It's funny because one of the main ones that people are most afraid of is public speaking. You know, they're not afraid to be 120 feet in the air. They're afraid of getting up in front of 120 people for some reason. But whatever it might be for you, I'm going to shed a little light on one of the fears that I have. Okay, one of those fears, for some reason, not that I'm aggressively afraid of this, but I've thought about this. This would be terrible. Is to be stuck in the middle of the ocean. All right, to be stranded in the middle of the ocean. I don't know if that's something that maybe you feel the same way. If you watched the Titanic as a kid, you probably share the same fear as I do. But so being stranded in the middle of the ocean just seems to be one of those things that's scary. I mean, you're sitting out there, you don't have a lot of hope left, right? You're worried about what's underneath you because you can't see very well. Maybe there's a storm. It's dark. It's salt water. You can't drink it really and live. And it's just a bad situation, a really, really bad situation. And if you think about that, sometimes the desperation of the lack of hope is maybe the worst part about it. You don't know if you're going to survive. You would be stuck out there, and it would be a bad thing. Well, tonight, the story that we're looking at is literally a story of the entire earth being flooded with water, right? This great thing that, if you're looking at the title here, it says, believe in the unseen, something that had never been seen before, all right? Now, if you would have walked up, or if God would have came to you as he came to Noah, and he would have said, Noah, I want you to build an ark, or whatever your name is, fill in the blank. McKay, I want you to build an ark because I'm going to flood the earth with water. You would have been like, what? Flood the earth with water? What are you talking about? And maybe you would be thinking that that's a real thing. But tonight we're going to go through a couple points, and we're going to try to take as much as we can out of this story in a very short amount of time. But I want you to notice something just to kind of start this passage out. In Genesis chapter 6, verse 5 through 6, it says, the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth. Now, this is how it all started with this story. And that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him in his heart. See, God was looking at the earth and was grieved in his heart about making man. He regretted that he had made man. All right, and it grieved him in his heart. And there's a line in there. It says, the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and it says that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. So God's looking at the earth and he's not pleased. And that's where this all kind of started with what God had decided to do. But notice something in verse 8. Skip down a little bit. It says, but Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. And here's my first question. I have 5 points tonight. Here's the first one. If you were Noah and you were in his shoes, would you find favor in the eyes of the Lord? Would you be somebody that God would say, I find favor in that person. I'm going to spare that person even though I'm going to destroy the rest of the world with a flood, that everyone is going to die in water. So the first point to notice is that because of who Noah was, because of the righteousness that he had, the way that he lived his life, he found favor in God's sight. What in your life is not causing you to find favor in God's sight? What would you need to get rid of right now in your life that's stopping you from finding favor in God's sight? And that's kind of the first point. If you're taking notes, would you find favor in God's sight? But if you go back up to verse 7, I want you to see the judgment that God was going to place on the earth. And here's what it says. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens. I am sorry that I have made them. So guys, there's this big judgment coming. All right. And in Noah's time, in Noah's day, God tells Noah about this huge judgment that's going to happen. Well, it's the same thing for us. We know of a great judgment that's going to happen. That none of our lives are going to last forever. That one day we're going to die. Whether it's being stranded out in the middle of the ocean, a really bad snake bite, maybe we just grow old and we die that way. Whatever it is, one day we're going to leave this earth, and there's a great judgment. And my second point tonight is this. Do you really believe in judgment? Do you really believe that if God said that Jesus is going to return a second time, that he's going to? Because God told Noah that the earth was going to be flooded with water, and Noah believed him. Noah believed him so much that he was going to spend the next, I believe, over maybe roughly 100 years of his life creating or building an ark, building a boat that his family and him could survive in, and the animals that God wanted him to take along with him. See, Noah really, really believed in judgment. And if you really, really believe, then, and I really, really believe in the judgment that's going to come, then would we be willing to do what Noah did? In Hebrews 11:7, it talks about Noah. All right, this is in the New Testament. It says in Hebrews 11:7, by faith, Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear constructed an ark for the saving of his household. So in faith, Noah believed God, even though events that were about to happen were yet seen. This was unseen territory, unseen stuff. This was stuff that he had to really believe God in order to know that the things that were going to happen were really going to happen. And that's why he's considered one of the people in Hebrews chapter 11 is talking about people that lived by faith. And Noah is a man that lived by faith. But we have to do the same thing. Live by faith that what God says is going to happen in the times to come that have not yet happened is going to happen. So are you do you believe in judgment? Here's number 3, all right? Point number 3 is, are you living out God's commands? So maybe you believe in judgment and you believe for sure that what God says is really going to happen, all right? Maybe tonight you'd say, I do believe. But notice these two passages that explain what Noah did. So God explains to Noah, he says, here's what you need to do. And then it says in Genesis 6:22, Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. Now, guys, we don't have time to read. I'm not going to read through the whole passage. It starts in about Genesis chapter 6, ends in about Genesis chapter 8, and you can read on from there if you want to. This is a couple chapters of story. So I'd encourage you, maybe go check out the story if you'd like to do that, and maybe some other things will stick out to you. But I'm pulling out these points. And in Genesis 6:22, it says, he did all that God commanded him. And there's another passage a little further in 7:5, and Noah did all that the Lord had commanded him. So Noah listened to God, even though what God was saying was events that have yet been seen before. He listened to God, even though maybe he had experienced some repercussions of building the ark. Maybe people were looking at him like he was crazy, or maybe they were persecuting. I don't know. But all I know is this guy starts building this massive ark, what's said to be about 3 times the size of a normal football field. And you can imagine that. Whew, that's a big ark. And he's building this thing, and I have to imagine that people maybe are looking at him like he's crazy and whatnot, but he's not, because God told him and he believed him, and he was willing to take action on what he believed. And in James chapter 1 verse 22, it says, but be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. Guys, as Christians, we're called to be doers of the word, to go out and do what God has called us to do. Now here, moving into our 4th point, in Genesis 8:1, it says, but God remembered Noah. All right? So God, here's where we're at in the story now. We fast forward a little bit. God flooded the earth. Noah and his family went in the ark with the animals that God sent him. And they're in this ark, and God has unleashed his wrath on mankind because of the corruption and evil that they had turned to. And then in Genesis 8, the first verse, it says, but God remembered Noah. So here's my 4th question, 4th point. Will God remember you? See, we all want God to remember us when it's time for him to remember us on judgment. But what are you doing now, and what am I doing now in order to please God? Because listen, guys, the whole rest of the creation, the whole rest of the world was destroyed in that flood. The rest of the world was destroyed in the flood, but Noah and his family and the animals that God sent him. Because God remembered Noah because of his righteousness, because he was a man that had found favor in God's eyes. So what am I doing, and what are you doing that we would find favor in God's eyes, that God would remember us when he's ready to judge the world, when he's ready to judge all of mankind when this life passes away? In Hebrews chapter 6, verse 10, it says, for God is not unjust so as to overlook your work and the love that you have shown for his name in serving the saints as you still do. All right, I'm not telling you this to say, oh, maybe, you're not doing what you need to do. Maybe you are doing what you need to do. And I want to remind you to continue that. Continue to live in a way where God will remember you. Well, God will know you on Judgment Day. Well, God will say, that's a child of mine that did my work. He or she followed the commands that I set out for him or her. All right. And this verse reminds us that God knows his children, and he looks out for his children. He knows those who are righteous, and he will not overlook our work for him. He will not overlook our work for him. His promises are true, and he is faithful and trustworthy. So when he says he won't overlook our work for him, he's not going to. All right. And our job as Christians is to continue on that path, doing the good work and living our lives in a way that is worthy of the call that God has called us for. Okay. And guys, here's the last point for this lesson tonight. Number 5, it says, will you allow God to lead? Sometimes one of the hardest things, guys, we want to establish our own way. We want to try to do things in a way that we think is smart and wise, and the way we think may be right. And while that's okay, the most important thing is that if we're doing that, we are first following God's commands. We are first following the way that God's leading. And God here tells Noah to do all these things, and he does them. All right, now Noah could have constructed his own ark. He could have made up his own mind about how to make the ark. He could have decided to do things his own way. And I can about imagine that based off of the massive dimensions and the detail that God gave Noah about the ark, Noah would have fell really short of what he needed to make. But he trusted God in getting the instructions about how to construct this ark and about what to do exactly, and he followed that. Well, the scripture gives us who we are to be in the world, what we are to do, all right? And we talk about these things, I think, a good bit. So we may not go over a lot of them, but sharing the message of the gospel and loving people and being a godly person, living in the world but not of the world, those are things that we are called to do and the ways we are called to be. And so when we walk in those things, we're allowing God to lead our lives. We're not trying to lead and say we're Christians. So that's one of the hardest things. But we go to a passage a little further down when Noah and his family are in the ark, all right? And it's about time that they start considering, okay, is it about time that we come out of this ark, or what do we do? And maybe they haven't heard word from God. Well, what do you do when you don't know what to do? Do you pray? Do you ask God for guidance? Do you allow God to lead you? And to me, this passage is kind of can be compared to prayer. So I'm going to explain real quickly without too much of the verses here what happened. So Noah opens up a window on the ark and he sends a raven out to try to see whether or not the water had already gone down. The raven flies around. He can't find anywhere to land. Then Noah sends out a dove, all right? And that dove flies around, can't find anywhere to land, and he comes back. And then the Bible says this, Genesis 8:10, he waited. He ends up waiting 7 days before he sends the dove out again. Now, oftentimes in prayer, and when we want God to lead our lives, we want it to happen now. God, please answer this question right now. What's my career going to be? God, who am I going to marry? Answer me right now, please. But that's not always how it works. And Noah was willing to be patient, trapped in this ark, this huge ark that has all these animals. I'm sure it had to start to stink at some point. It was probably getting a little crammy. Now you're trapped at home, and you might be getting a little crammy in your house. And maybe it's starting to stink in your house. I don't know. I'm just saying, whatever the case may be, maybe you're getting a little, maybe you're starting to get snappy with your family. You're getting frustrated because you're tired of being cooped at home. Guys, they were trapped in this ark for days, for a long time. And they had to stay in there with all these animals too. And the coolest thing about this specific passage I love is that it says he waited. But he says it again, but it says before that, in Genesis 8:11, and the dove came back to him in the evening. This is after he sent it out, after he waited, and he sent it out 7 days later. And the dove came back to him in the evening, and behold, in her mouth was a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah goes through these steps, and finally, he sends this dove out after he waited. And those 7 days, I know we're just saying it, but 7 days, if you're waiting, trying to figure out when you're going to be able to get out of this ark, that dove coming back with an olive leaf was probably just one of the best signs of relief. Like, hey, God is giving us, God is hearing our desire to he's seeing our desire to get out of this ark. And maybe with your prayers, sometimes you ask God for something and you see a little a little snippet of things working out. You see that maybe it's coming around, all right, but it's not there yet. But then it says again, Genesis 8:12, then he waited another 7 days and sent forth the dove, and she did not return to him anymore. So Noah waited another 7 days before he sent her out again. But he knew, hey, we're getting there. We're getting close. And he probably had that feeling like it was coming towards the end of all of this. And when he sent her out, when he sent the dove out the next time, the dove did not return. And guys, what I want to encourage you is that in your Christian walk, if sometimes you feel like you know that God's leading you, but you're not sure where he's sending you yet, continue to trust in him and do what you know to do. And maybe for you, that relates really well to Noah sending out those birds to try to see whether or not the ground was dry yet. Just continuing to be patient and trust God's timing for things to work out right. So I'm going to go through those 5 points again really quickly. Would you find favor in God's sight? Do you believe in judgment? Are you living out God's command? So do you believe in judgment? Just to tie those together, do you believe in judgment enough to act it out? Will God remember you? And will you allow God to lead? Guys, there's so much that we can learn from a Bible story like this. I feel like we probably could have broke this down and talked about it for a couple more and just in pieces. But the important thing is that if something sticks out to you, then you take that serious to your life and you allow that to be part of the change that's happening in your personal walk with God. And if something stuck out to you, maybe go look it up. Like I said, Genesis 6, chapter 6 through chapter 8-ish. And you can look at that story. But thanks for being attentive tonight and listening to the service. And like we said, the messages are going to be on YouTube now, so you can always go find it on there. And just continue to try to stay in touch with good friends. And if y'all need anything, as always, you can call me or Brad or Jason or any of us, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can, guys. Glad you got to listen tonight, and hope y'all have a great rest of the week.